Welcome. This show is called The Story Matters. We are people who believe that the story is important. And today we have two really fine people to share with us their stories. I want to introduce Shawn. Shawn, tell me your last name. Good
O'Neill.
Irish name.
Shawn O'Neill.
O'Neill. I knew that. Shawn, Shawn is and I have discovered each other. We've known about each other for a long time, but didn't know who we were. Because our best friends were down in New Jersey with us, and they felt like being lost and wanting to come back to Vermont, to Bristol, their hometown, their home base. So we used to spend time strategizing about how they should do that. And they finally said they quit their jobs and they sold their house and they moved to the cottage that was available, and they just did it and never looked back. They liked it, and we made our move finally years when we retired in 1999. Now, and I've heard talks about with the young son in that family about his friend who wants to be a writer and a storyteller. And I said, we've got to meet sometime. So this fall, I think it was, we were at a party for the home for hospice.
Hospice, yep.
And you were talking to, you had your cowboy hat on.
Oh, that's right. I forgot my cowboy hat.
and you were talking about stories and where we were going to go.
Right.
And all of a sudden you said the magic words. You said Bill Payne.
Yep.
And when he said Bill Payne, I just stopped, because Bill Payne, the senior, was my age, and we were best friends for all those years, and we were part of the exodus out of New Jersey to come to Vermont to get some good sense, you know. And so he is connected with this Bill Payne.
Yeah, we went to school together.
The younger,
Yep.
we went to school together.
Yep.
So Shawn has been sharing his stories and sharing his writing, and we're very pleased today he's going to share in this conversation with our special guest. So Shawn, you take it over.
Yeah. Our special guest today, and it's an honor to have you here, is Corellis Bryant, who is the 42nd pastor of the United Church of Lincoln. And he's not only the minister there, he's my minister as well, and he's a friend. So I've heard some stories that we talked about already, but this time it is his time to tell the stories.
Yes.
And one thing I got to say though is, out of us three people, I'm the layman, because we have two ministers here. So
we're trying to keep that a secret.
Yeah, we'll see where this goes. Now, Corellis, you're the pastor of this tiny little church in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. And can you tell us your journey? You know, your journey to become a minister and your journey to come to this tiny little church in the middle of nowhere in Vermont.
Yes. First of all, I am honored to be here. Lynn, thank you for the invitation. Shawn, thank you for the invitation. It is a wild and wondrous adventure. My journey to ministry started at the age of 12 in the backwoods of a youth camp, a Baptist, Southern Baptist youth camp in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I, at that time, was a member of a small church in the Southern Baptist tradition. And so I went to camp faithfully. And at this particular camp, the camp preacher, an old Southern drawl preacher, was describing the Bible as the greatest love story ever told. Not only because of the inherent dramatic narrative elements, but because we believe it to be true. A great many folks do. And he extended the invitation. Are there any folks out there who would want to be storytellers of God's story of love? And I had had some exposure to theater as an elementary school, middle school kid. So I thought, I'm a pretty decent storyteller. I guess we'll see today if that remains true. And so my heart was convicted by that I was compelled by the Judeo-Christian story, the story of God, and surrendered to tell that story for the rest of my life, and wrote in my little Bible that I was going to be a pastor. And it was so clear to me at the age of 12 that that's what my life was intended for. As I grew older, the specific doctrine of that particular church started to feel less and less authentic for me. The Southern Baptists have been in the news lately over their stance around women and not honoring women as pastors or clergy. That's been the case for quite some time. And there are other facts about that tradition that didn't feel right for me. And so I actually walked away from the church by the time I got to high school, and sort of disavowed the church, certainly being a Baptist and almost even being a Christian. And so as my religious fervor subsided, my interest in the arts and theater rose to the fore. But you took this high school Southern Baptist preacher boy who was on fire for God and the gospel, but who is now confused and questioning everything. And you pick him up from the great American South, northern Florida, and you drop him in New York City for 4 years, which is where I attended college at NYU, New York University, where I studied theater. And thought I was done with the church, and had a wonderful experience as a stage actor. Made it to Broadway at Lincoln Center, and then progressed through undergrad and looked at law school for a while, and started working in the nonprofit sector. But something was missing. Something wasn't whole within. My interior life was still a bit disrupted, and I didn't at the time know why that was. And it took me into almost a quarter life crisis at the age of 25, and it became clear to me that faith was the organizing principle of my life since I was a child. And I didn't properly estimate what it would mean for my sense of being and my ability to make sense of the world without it. So it unraveled, but I didn't replace it with anything. And so I was adrift, and felt dislocated, unmoored, unhome. And that changed when I started working at a faith-based nonprofit in Jacksonville, Florida, called Rethreaded. And it was an incredible faith-based organization that helped women who had been human trafficked and sex trafficked. Really terrible stories there. I was brought in to do some of the fundraising, but the women caught wind that I used to be this religious person. And so they asked if they could talk to me. And we'd have these conversations. Even though they had a counselor, they had a trauma therapist, they sought me out for counsel, for comfort. And it kept happening. I was doing more of that than fundraising, which I'm sure my boss was not pleased with. But the Spirit sort of nudged me and said, you know what's happening right now, don't you? You're being a pastor. They are coming to you because they see a gift in you. to love and walk alongside them. And so that brought me back to that 12-year-old clarity. And then I thought, well, what about this doctrine and dogma and theology and what I believe? And the Spirit said, well, there's a marvelous place for you to work all of that out. And it's called seminary. So the calling was right, even if my belief system was still evolving and expanding. I had it right at 12. Of who I was intended to be, how I understood it and spoke about it. Well, not only was it an evolving process, in some ways it still is.
Yeah, it always will be.
And always will be.
Yeah.
The moment we think we've captured the mystery in all its fullness is the moment that we might be further away than we think we are.
Now the question I always had, because I know where you were church beforehand, why Vermont?
Yeah.
Especially where you came from, if you don't mind mentioning that.
Sure, yeah. So less than a year ago,
Yeah,
Shawn,
yeah, I
from
know.
today, I was the associate minister for mission at St. James Episcopal Church on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. What the Episcopalians call a cardinal parish. It was well-resourced, well-funded. In fact, it was the favorite parish of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. When Archbishop Tutu would come to New York, instead of going to St. John the Divine, which is the cathedral there, he'd come to St. James because of his friendship with the rector there. So I was living in East Harlem and working on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I was schmoozing with the glitterati of the Upper East Side. I was drinking martinis at the Carlisle, and I wish I could say that I had scornful judgment for those folks, but that is not true. I fit in perfectly. Okay. I enjoyed that style of living, but they were also committed to their faith, even though they might be presumed to really have it all together and might stay insular, but they really do work for the justice of others who aren't as fortunate as they are. And loved St. James, but I'm an ordained Baptist pastor, and so when they were looking to streamline and downsize their staff, the Baptist preacher was the first to go. Yeah. Not obviously an ordained Episcopal priest, but a Baptist pastor. So, and plus I had only recently been hired there, so sort of first to come, first to leave. And so I found myself in discernment about my next adventure. And I wanted to stay in New York City. I only applied to jobs in New York City, and this was the summer, literally, this last summer.
That's right.
I'm applying to jobs, Len, but only in New York. I after NYU, I loved it there, didn't want to leave, had made my way back triumphantly. And the doors weren't opening. And the Spirit came again to me and said, do you want to be a pastor in New York City, or did I call you to be a pastor? And I thought, well, and the Spirit said, when you were 12 in the backwoods of that Chattanooga youth camp, you didn't know what or who Manhattan was. You were in love with the idea of loving and walking alongside my people. And I was convicted that I had gotten caught up in the social stature and status of New York City. And hobnobbing in the religious glitterati had made its way inward. And I loved the prestige of St. James and of New York City. And the Spirit said, what if the people I want you to serve and love weren't in the 5 boroughs? What then? And so I had this surrender in my spirit. It was the biggest spiritual eye roll of my life because God was right. God was right. And so I thought that meant, okay, if not New York, then maybe Boston or DC. couldn't have envisioned Vermont, but I did start to apply to other churches outside of New York City. And the deal that I made with the Spirit, that I made with God, was I'll do the knocking, and you open the door. Mm-hmm. And I promise to knock on any opportunity that comes, and I will trust you to open the door, and I will walk through, trusting that that's the next assignment that you've picked for me. So I start applying to other churches, and I'm in my Harlem apartment, and I'm hitting the refresh button on my email, driving myself crazy, waiting for a reply. Mm-hmm. It's the summer. Churches traditionally don't hire in the summer. Nobody's there.
Right.
And I have this idea, this impromptu idea, to get out of the apartment. Just get out, get some fresh air, give it time for things to come together. And before I could talk myself out of it, I was at LaGuardia Airport getting handed the keys to a Toyota Corolla because I was going to take a New England road trip just to get out of the city. So
You really got fresh air.
yeah. Get out of the concrete jungle, really just change it up a bit and distract myself from this intensive job search. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm not even going to plan it. I'm just going to hit the road. I have friends in Connecticut. I have friends in Rhode Island. My best college friends both live in Providence. And I've got dear friends in Boston. Mm-hmm. And so as I get closer to those places, I'll just reach out to folks and see who's available. So I hit the road. Mm-hmm. This is June of last June.
Oh, last June.
Last June. Not this past month, but last summer.
2023.
2023.
Yep.
At this point, just over a year. And the first place I get to is Connecticut. So I go on my phone and I pull up all my contacts from Connecticut and I send a blast message. Hey guys, I'm going to be in town. If you've got some time to hang out, let me know. No one responded except one friend. A friend that I had only met a month or so prior in May at this conference of progressive Baptist ministers in New York City. Met him once, his name was in my phone, and when I looked up Connecticut, there he was. He's the only person that had time for me that day. Says, come on over, would love to hang out. I get there, his name is Reverend Justin Cox.
Oh, I get it now.
Shawn knows where this is going. Justin, at that time, was pastoring a church in Connecticut, but just a year and a half or so prior, Justin Cox was serving the United Church of Lincoln in Lincoln,
Vermont. I remember. Justin.
And so we're talking, and he's like, hey, man, what are you looking for your next assignment? And I said, well, at the Episcopal Church, we Baptists were sort of looked at as second-class clergy a little bit. I couldn't institute communion. I couldn't do this. So the next opportunity I'm looking for is one where I can serve fully and bring all of me to the ministry, everything I've got. And he says, well, if you want a place where you would be bringing everything you've got, have you ever been to Vermont? And I hadn't. No one I knew had ever been to Vermont. I barely knew anything about Vermont other than Bernie Sanders and maple syrup and Ben and Jerry's. And he says there's this gorgeous church in this beautiful, idyllic little mountain village, and they've been looking for a pastor for over a year and a half now. And when he first said it, I immediately dismissed it. I thought, well, that's cute and all, but I just came from St. James Episcopal Church on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a tiny village of 1,200 in northern Vermont. That's someone else's calling. That can't be mine. And so we'd move on in the conversation, but then he'd come back to it. And another thing about Lincoln, the people are so sweet. Okay. We'd keep talking. And another thing about Lincoln. And so by the time I went back to the hotel that evening, the only thing on my mind was Lincoln, Vermont. And the Spirit came back and said, remember that deal we made? You do the knocking. So I look up the church profile. I look up the town of Lincoln, and I'm reading the pastor search committee describe what they're looking for in a pastor. And one of the opening sentences were, we've been without a pastor. We've done okay. We're healthy, but we're looking for a pastor to come in and love us and walk alongside us and rally us toward a vision so that we might better be the presence of God in this community. But it was that phrase, a pastor who could love us and walk alongside us. Because you may have picked up on it in my sharing already, that is almost precisely the language I use when I describe what the role of a pastor is, to love and walk alongside. And when I saw that phrase, the Spirit within me came alive. And I looked up the church and all the demographics of the town, and I found that the church had recently passed a statement of welcome and inclusion for the LGBTQIA community, which is something that I care deeply about. I walked in the New York City Pride Parade weeks before applying. And then I noticed that the town of Lincoln had also adopted a welcoming and inclusion statement for the LGBTQIA community. And so that signaled to me that this isn't some backwater, provincial, rural, ragtag group, that these are thoughtful folks who might be a good fit for this progressive young pastor coming straight from Manhattan. And so I applied.
And the rest is history. It will continue to be history.
It's interesting. I hear you. The one person that shared this was somebody had this connection, Justin, right? And as have you found other people like Justin? As you go along here, that somehow just speak to you and connect with you and help you connect with us and them.
Yeah, I'd say what has been probably one of the most unexpected and rewarding realizations is how much I have in common with the people of the church and the people of the town. How much of our sort of faith journey is shared. I will start humming a song from my childhood, a beloved hymn that I was singing in Jacksonville, Florida, northern Florida, so the South, in my young church days. And the congregation will start humming that song with me. They know the song. It was the song of their childhood and their youth. And so some folks in Lincoln have never left Lincoln, have never lived anywhere else.
No, I know. Yeah.
Which is perhaps not uncommon in this part of the world. And yet there are these ties that bind, as we say, in the faith. I have been shocked by that. The meeting me sort of on the same page, whether theologically or ecclesiastically in terms of how the church is run, has made me realize that it feels like this was divinely orchestrated some time ago, because the fit for this pastor and this church, for this shepherd and this flock, is quite a good fit, which I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah. When I came to town back in '99,
Wow.
there was a clergy group called the Addison County Clergy Group. Met out on 7 in a restaurant, and the restaurant owner loved his wife was the one who pushed this clergy group there, and the priest came because they were in the school, and she was working in the school, and she was a beloved teacher, and so there was a very active, broad presence, and I, of course, I knew nothing about the community in those early days, but I remember Lincoln because the question was, is David coming? Okay. And David was the pastor of the Lincoln Church at
For
that
many,
time.
many years.
And there was this kind of this feeling that I had. That there was something special up there, and I had no idea where Lincoln was at the time, because we were just beginning to explore this area. One of my best 2 days in Lincoln was Ann and I went up to Lincoln to see a friend and drop off some music, I think, for her. My wife's an organist and choir director, and on this one day, it was fall. It was absolutely beautiful, the leaves, and I could not believe going up there how beautiful this was. We had to deliver something to her the next day. On the next day, it was snowing. The very next day, we're going up, and I'm going on the same path, and there's leaves. And I thought, no place should be this blessed that it could have fall one day and winter the next day.
Yes.
So that's my earliest memories of Lincoln.
Yes, I call it Green Mountain Paradise.
Yeah.
It is certainly Edenic in a sense, sort of the Garden of Eden, that sort of lush, green, verdant landscape everywhere.
What was your, so you have a whole year that you've been in this paradise. Can you think of, there's probably many, but can you think of the one place you went and the one event that happened that just comes the first thing that comes to your thought about Lincoln and Vermont in general?
You're right. There are so many at this point, but I'll tell you. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
One really meaningful occurrence is I was trying to set up my office at the church and decorate the office, and I am quite partial to the foot washing scene in the New Testament, where Jesus gets down on his hands and feet at the Last Supper and washes the disciples' feet. I love that. That, to me, is the clearest vision for a minister, I think, in the biblical text. Beyond shepherd, beyond gardener, beyond vine dresser, it's the foot washer for me, and the humility and service that captures. So I'm wanting to hang a print of that scene in my office, and looking online to just buy a framed print, just throw it up there and be done. And as I'm looking online, I'm not finding anything that I like. It's just, it's too rigid, or it's not the right color. And I learned that we have a great deal of artists
In Lincoln.
Brilliant visual artists and performance artists, and I thought of one of the artists who I met. He also happens to be a bread maker and sells his bread in the Lincoln General Store.
Oh yes. Yeah.
But he's also an incredible visual artist, and I call his partner and I say, I'm thinking of asking this gentleman, thinking of commissioning a painting. Which I've never done in my entire life. I didn't really know you could just commission it, but I had that notion internally that this might be a meaningful opportunity for someone. And so I call his partner and I say, "Hey, do you think he'd be interested?" And his partner says, "I think he'd be absolutely honored. You should give him a call." So I call him and I explain what I'm looking for, and he is so grateful that I thought of him for this project. And so we had a discussion about what I wanted, some aesthetics that were important to me, and then I left the rest of it to his artistic interpretation.
Okay, good.
He worked on that painting for 2 or 3 months. I commissioned it in October. And my installation ceremony, where you install the new pastor formally in the church, was in December, and my whole family was going to be coming. My mother, my sister, my brother, my godmother, and my niece. And we decided to do an unveiling of that painting at the installation ceremony. And I had never seen it prior to that. No one had ever seen it prior to that. So we had this lovely installation service at the Lincoln Library, and my family is excited about this. The church is excited. They've heard about this, and I'm excited. And so here's this photo that is draped. We pull the drape back, and there it is. And you've seen it, Shawn.
Yeah, I was there.
It is this incredible Renaissance-style portrait of the foot washing scene with exquisite detail. The Church of Lincoln is sort of in the background of the painting through the windows, and just a breathtaking experience.
Let me take you out of Lincoln for a little bit. As you have lived now in Lincoln and in Vermont, what do you see of the connections between Lincoln and the state, so that Lincoln is just not alone, isolated, but how do you see the connections, or what questions do you have that? Why aren't there those connections, you know?
Between Lincoln and the rest of Vermont?
The rest of Vermont, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'd say I have spent a fair amount of time in Burlington, as you might imagine. Some friends there. Huntington, some friends there. And Bristol, of course. So that's probably, in terms of really connecting deeply with folks outside of Lincoln, it's usually those areas. I will say, I do get the sense that the state of Vermont has a very unique and distinct culture, where there's a great deal of pride, I think, around being neighborly, being a good neighbor, looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And coming from New York City, where you don't even know who's in your building, let alone who's in the town, that determination to be kind and conscientious and thoughtful I seem to encounter that wherever I go in the Green Mountain State.
Our family had 6 years connected to the little town down the road, Ripton. My wife taught school there, and we were involved with the community, and there is that bind and that bondage there, and so that's, you know, it's there's from our perspective, it really is something that's characteristic of the whole state, which makes a difference. The other question I thought wondered, could you give a little definition of what, when you use the word progressive?
Yeah.
What do, how do you understand that? And
Yeah.
would that would you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think some people, rightly so, criticize putting a faith conviction along a spectrum that can sound political. But I think what is important for me is that it is a spectrum. There are several spectrums within a religious identity. I think the first and foremost one is your relationship to Scripture. And if you take a more literal approach to Scripture, then you tend to be on one end of the spectrum that might be described as conservative, the more traditional view. When Martin Luther came out with Sola Scriptura, the Scripture only, that elevated the scriptural text to a pretty sovereign state. If you are more willing to pay attention to the genre of Scripture and the poetry of Scripture and the metaphor of Scripture, the allegory of Scripture, and you take it less literally, but as a compilation of these different genres attempting to say something about this ineffable, uncontainable divine mystery, if you have a more open-handed approach to the scriptural text, then you might have, that's a more modern, a more progressive view of Scripture. So that's on one continuum where you could have those differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's
Yeah, and a couple others. Yeah, the Scripture interpretation, your theological convictions can also be on that continuum.
Sure. Okay. Shawn, you want another question?
No, well, this is not religious or anything, but one thing that Corellis have been trying to find, both of us, is a good barbecue place in Vermont. Yeah. So if anybody knows of a good barbecue place in Vermont, let us know.
Yeah, I think I won't name any names of restaurants around that I've tried, but I have yet to find decent barbecue. I will say I got in trouble at my church a couple weeks ago that it's a tradition around here for the firemen to have a chicken barbecue.
Yeah.
And I heard that and I thought, well, what in the world is a chicken barbecue? You mean there's just chicken there? If you go to a barbecue in the South, Lynn,
Yeah.
chicken is the least thing you're excited about. You got to have ribs and brisket on that menu. Right. So I got in trouble because I said, well, this, with all due respect, this is grilled chicken. It's not quite barbecue.
Yeah. I had experience with South one summer and lived on chicken, fried chicken. It's really good. And I came home, and before going back to seminary, my mother fixed chicken the way she normally fixed it, and he did it with water and in a dish, and she pulled it out, and I said to myself, where did she get that anemic chicken? I did not tell her that story until towards the end of her life. I never say bad things about your mother's chicken.
Right. Yeah.
It's the moral of that story. Yeah. Is there other things that you'd like to share in terms of your hopes and expectations, maybe, perhaps?
Yeah. I two things. One, it's been really lovely for me to discover that, New York City, the city itself played such an important role in the content of my life. I might go to Broadway one day, go to the Met, walk the High Line, go to Central Park. So the content of my life was largely the city itself. But in a place like Lincoln, the people, and the story of the people, is primarily the content of my life, the experiences that
Yeah.
the Shawn O'Neills of the world have lived. What makes you tick? What do you find funny? What are you passionate about? That is now the content of my life primarily. And just lastly, being the only church in town,
Right.
it's
Right.
my goal and hope that anyone who wishes to connect to the divine in whatever terms are most meaningful to them will feel welcomed and celebrated to do that with us and among us. The primary expression will be Christian. We do learn from and are guided by the story of Jesus of Nazareth. But I believe within that is so much room for other expressions as well. So that's my hope.
Well, thank you. I think that might be a good point on which we could take this conversation um, and put it to rest.
Indeed.
But I'll look forward to other conversations.
Indeed.
In the days to come.
Would love that.
Both with Shawn and with
Yeah.
you and with other folks as well. So
Would love
thank you for being here today.